The Crosby-era Penguins are a dynasty. The Florida Panthers are attempting to become a dynasty. We compare and contrast their runs, all on today's crossover edition between Locked On Panthers and Locked On Penguins.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this crossover edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Pittsburgh Penguins podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making both of our Locked On podcasts your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, the host of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. You can follow me on X at Monoman12. That is Hunter Hodies, the host of Locked On Penguins. You can follow him on X at Hunter Hodies. He is also the Thursday co-host of the Locked On NHL podcast, so you'll be able to hear his voice multiple times here this week. But Hunter, I'm very excited to record this episode. Welcome to the show, my friend, as we are talking about Dynasty when it comes to what the Crosby-era Penguins have been and what the Florida Panthers are attempting to become.
Right. I mean, the Penguins, they won 3 in an 8-year span. Times haven't been good recently. They're rebuilding right now, or they haven't really said the word, but you don't have to squint too far to see that is their exact plan right now. But you have to pay the piper eventually. But it was a lot of fun. And, this era, this is basically 20 years of Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Kris Letang. I wouldn't trade it for the world. And, the Panthers, they have a legit shot to do this year. I really do believe that.
Yeah, and I'm probably going to be saying the same thing sometime after 2030 when most of the contracts expire, all the clauses for the Panthers change when it goes to that. So, and I'm sure the Blackhawks were thinking about that in 2020. So I'm for this. Let's get right into it. I mean, right before this 3-year playoff drought, the Penguins made the playoffs for 16 straight season in the Crosby era. The Panthers are currently at 6 straight if you do count the Stanley Cup qualifiers for them. But just the build of both of these franchises, one thing, because this is all going to be just a compare and contrast when it comes to these two teams. I mean, this era of Sidney Crosby, you're talking about 3 different GMs that they had to go through this build. Craig Patrick is the original one who drafted Crosby. Then Ray Shero builds the 2009 one, and then Jim Rutherford comes in, and just 2 seasons later, they're Stanley Cup champions. For the Panthers here, Bill Zito takes over after the 2020 season. For Dale Talon, which, crazy enough, the Panthers and Penguins are actually connected in quite a few trades that actually helped the Panthers win the Stanley Cup. First one was Dale Talon trading Nick Bjugstad and Jared McCann with term left on their deal, which opened up the cap space for Dale Talon to sign Sergei Bobrovsky. And then Bill Zito trading the Mike Matheson contract for the Panthers in exchange for Patrick Hornqvist, which is honestly the very first domino of the Panthers trying to at least change their identity. So a little bit of a change for GMs of finishing the job versus guys who started it.
Right. And, I still look back on the McCann deal as good for the Penguins. I don't like the way they handled the expansion situation, but that's a few years. It's been a few years. We don't really need to look at that. And then, the Hornqvist trade, it felt like it was time just because of his contract situation, and they had an opportunity to get a defenseman who is all gas, no brakes. He was fun during the time he was here. Didn't work out towards the end. He's still all gas, no brakes in Montreal.
Yeah,
it's fine. But yeah, I mean, those were still some pretty big trades because, Hornqvist, he was still a pretty big figure down there, at least towards the late stages of his career, excuse me.
Yeah, no doubt. And he was a big part of that transition for the Panthers there. And when it comes to just these overall builds for the Panthers, I talk a lot about how the Panthers were able to just sign Alexander Barkov during the flat cap. That was the first domino, not the first domino, but one of the dominoes after the Hornqvist trade, which the Panthers had not won a playoff series in 26 years at the time, but also how they're able to get their superstars under a certain percentage of the cap. I'm just looking at the Pittsburgh Penguins and their big 3 of Crosby, Malkin, Letang, they took up 35% of the cap in 2016. At the time, it was a $71.4 million total cap for the entire league. The Panthers, I would include their big three of Barkov, Tkachuk, and Ekblad, 32.3 for in the 2024 season for an 83.5 million. But also at the time that Crosby signed his deal, it was right before the NHL was going into their lockout. There was a lot of uncertainty at the time when it came to just signing to what the NHL was going to be, what was going to happen after. When it comes to you think about the 12-year extension for Crosby and how much that has worked out, which he's still on, by the way. How beneficial has been to at least build around Crosby?
Well, Mondo, he's about to be off of it. Actually, the extension does kick in this season. So 2 years on this new extension. That 12-year one finally expired, which is crazy to think about, by the way. Like, the deal just absolutely flew by. You can't even sign that type of extension anymore just because the CBA changed. But he did the Penguins a favor by taking below market value. And honestly, the big three in general really helped out the Penguins. Like, yeah, it seems like a lot when you look at the cap in years past. But Evgeny Malkin was at $9.5 million for a lot of those years. Kris Letang, he could have taken more money than he could have gotten on the open market. He decided to take less just because the other two did. And in turn, that allowed the Penguins to build out their depth really smartly, especially once Rutherford went on that year-long heater where everything he touched turned to gold, the way that he was able to fill out the depth in the rest of that 2016 team, the kids that he called up once Mike Sullivan took over. 2017 still made the right moves to help out the depth after some of the players left after 2016. It wasn't that many, but it was still like you had to make at least a little bit of moves over that offseason. The moves that he made at the trade deadline, especially because Kris Letang was not going to be available for the playoffs, they had the room because of those below market deals. Like, they could have taken a lot more on the open market if they had gotten there or if they had asked, but they said, no, like we want to win here and we will take less to make it happen. And you're still seeing it here on Crosby's extension. He signed for the exact same extension just because he's that superstitious. He could have gotten more on the open market. We all know that. Evgeny Malkin, I think he could have gotten more on the open market when he signed his last extension, but he took a discount from where he was at just because of his age and all that. But he still, I think, could have gotten upwards of $7 million on the open market if he did. But again, like, when you have good management and when you have a winning environment, some players, especially your stars, they'll sometimes want to take less to help out the other team, well, sometimes. I think they'll want to take less so they can help out. But with other teams, that's sometimes not the case.
Because a lot of the conversation in South Florida was all about taxes and state income tax, but Pennsylvania, I mean, they have state income tax, but look what happens when you build a team that wins. People want to stay.
People want to come and play for you. People want to stay and all that. So there you go.
Yeah. So that the proof is in the pudding of when you create a culture around. And I mean, I remember Sidney Crosby had to travel to South Florida to meet with Evgeny Malkin to sign, as far as like talking to him about the most recent extension for him, and just honestly, they get to hopefully end their careers together, and hopefully they get to ride into the sunset. And obviously, it's funny because Malkin took below market value, just like Aaron Ekblad. Kris Letang's extension is long. That is a long one that he might not finish with the actual team. They might LTIR him, just kind of like Brad Marchand. So that's a lot of the comparison part of this when it comes to just these two as far as like building. But we have a few more to get to as far as turning points between the Florida Panthers and the Pittsburgh Penguins in their respective Stanley Cup runs, and a little bit more of contrast of the unsung heroes and more. We'll discuss this next on this crossover edition of Locked On Panthers and Locked On Penguins. But first, we're going to tell you guys all about Monarch Money. And ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your personal CFO, give you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center you can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. And some of the subscriptions that, for me personally, that I didn't know I was still paying for, Monarch Money pointed that out, and I was able to cancel some of those subscriptions thanks to Monarch Money. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at Monarch Money for 50% off your order. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off of your first year. Segment number 2 on this crossover edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Pittsburgh Penguins podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you once again for making both of our podcasts your first listen of the day. So, when it some of the contrasts for the Panthers and the Penguins here, it's funny. All 3 of their championships for Pittsburgh have come on the road. For the back-to-back Stanley Cup champions for the Florida Panthers, both of them came at home. And this is something that hasn't been done since the late 80s Oilers on clinching 2 Stanley Cups on home ice. So the Panthers find themselves in a little bit of they did something that hadn't been done in almost 30 years there. But another thing is just the turning points. I want to discuss turning points in the respective playoff runs for the Penguins, especially their back-to-back. For the Panthers, it's come at different points where it was either for the 2024 run, it was Game 4 of the Eastern Conference Final against New York Rangers. Sam Reinhart scores that overtime winner off the post and in. And for this year, it was Brad Marchand scoring that overtime winner. But it's crazy, Hunter. The Panthers in conference finals have not had to really sweat it out. The last 3 seasons for them, they're 12-3. But for Pittsburgh, my goodness, 2 straight Game 7s, including a double overtime winner by Chris Kunitz. So that's another thing of just how you're right there. You could smell the Stanley Cup final. It's right on the horizon, and you're just approaching it. So another contrast there for these 2 teams.
Yeah, Chris Kunitz basically ended the Ottawa Senators franchise for almost the next decade. Almost, but yeah. The Senators got back to the playoffs, of course, this year. But yeah, those 2 series they played, they were very tough, but for different reasons. The Lightning, they were just great, even without Steven Stamkos. And Stamkos did come back for a Game 7. They were also great even without Ben Bishop, who was absolutely phenomenal in 2016. I still remember when I was watching Game 1, and you could hear the scream like from the TV. I can't even imagine what people heard in the arena, but you could tell something was really wrong with him when you heard the scream when he got really hurt. And I was thinking like, oh, he's out. Like they have their backup goalie. Little did we know, Armando, that was Andrei Vasilevsky, who I was like, yep, this guy is probably going to be very good for a long time. And we have seen that since. He's one of the best goalies in the league. He was phenomenal for the Lightning in that series. The Kucherov line was amazing. They were able to get Stamkos back for Game 7. Really fun series between 2 great teams. People can debate however they want if Stamkos was healthy and Bishop was healthy for the full series, if they would have beaten the Penguins. But, we'll never know. But it was still a really tough series between 2 high-flying teams. Ottawa was a bit different just because the way they pushed back, the way they could strike at a moment's notice, the way they defended was also unlike anything the Penguins had seen in the 2017 playoffs. So it was just a very big adjustment going up, from teams that are very high-flying to a team that kind of sits back, traps a bit. They're not that good from behind. But the Senators still made the Penguins really work for it. I mean, that was a 2-1 series lead for the Senators going into Game 4 with a chance to go up 3-1. The Penguins were able to play a really good Game 4. They blow them out in Game 5. Ottawa comes home, comes from behind to win that game in Game 6. Actually, no, sorry. They did not come from behind to win that. Actually, I believe they did. I have to make sure. They won that game by 1 goal. And then just Game 7 was just an all-out war. It was ridiculous. So, again, just 2 very different series, but 2 that also win the distance when you compare it to Florida, where you play a Hurricanes team a couple times where I like the Hurricanes, but without that true game-breaking superstar, I just don't know if they're ever going to get to a Cup final. I still think they're very good, one of the best teams in the league, but I just don't think they're ever going to get to a Stanley Cup final without that game-breaking superstar. The Rangers, I like them, but some of their star players sometimes go cold. But the Panthers, they've still been the best team in the East these last 3 years. And heck, even going into this year, I don't really see that changing just because I think the East is also just bad.
Yeah. Even signing Nikolai Ehlers for the Carolina Hurricanes, I mean, he's had a lot of injury issues even during his time with the Winnipeg Jets. I mean, and also the play styles of the New York Rangers and the Carolina Hurricanes are just vastly different, which the Hurricanes are Corsi Kings, while Igor Shesterkin was just under siege basically that whole series. I mean, I would argue that Game 3 against the Rangers was a little bit of a fluke where Alex Venberg got the game winner for the Rangers there on where there was a little bit of a miscommunication between Evan Rodriguez and Sam Bennett, where Sam Bennett, let's not forget, he also injured his hand in that same playoff series in the first round for the Panthers against Lightning in that year. But let's talk about unsung heroes for both of these teams. I mean, for the Panthers, I mean, their first run, the one that they lost, Alex Lyon was a big one, at least getting them there, and then Sergei Bobrovsky taking over after Game 3, starting in Game 4. Although they lost Game 4 against Boston, really was the beginning of that run for the Panthers. And I mean, for Florida there, Carter Verhaeghe coming up big multiple times, Sam Bennett as well, even though and even in different situations where Vladimir Tarasenko struggled for the most part of the playoffs and then comes big in the Rangers series, especially the game-winning goal in Game 6. But man, we talk about how contending teams need to have cheap talent in order to win. Jake Guentzel in 2017 was phenomenal, bursting on the scene for Pittsburgh, starting that for that run. That's a big one that when it came to them winning the second one.
Every time they needed a goal, he was right there. You know, I still have the picture on my phone of all the Columbus fans just like looking stunned when Guentzel scored the goal in overtime to put them up 3-0 in that first round series against the Blue Jackets. And I did want to make sure I was right. The Senators did come back from behind in Game 6. It was Malkin that scored. I just had to make sure it wasn't the 1-1 goal and something else, but it was the 1-0 goal. Just had to make sure because I thought I had it. I just had to double check. But again, yeah, Guentzel, man. I mean, heck, the goal in Game 1 against the Predators, Penguins go 30 plus minutes without a shot. First one they have goes in from Jake Guentzel. Just, you can't make it up, right? Like, he was so great that run. But some of the other players that really sometimes don't get enough love, Matt Cullen, I thought was tremendous those 2 years. He scored some really big goals for the Penguins, was huge on the penalty kill. I can't say enough about Nick Bonino's efforts, and now he's coming back to be an assistant coach on the new Penguins coaching staff. Really cool for a full circle moment, but he was great in the defensive zone. He great in all three zones, scored some absolutely clutch goals. We all have the great goal call from the Hockey Night in Punjabi for 2016 and 2017. Just fantastic stuff from that crew. You know, obviously the goal against Washington to eliminate them will forever, live in my head. But just that entire line, like, that's a big similarity to the Panthers. The Penguins' third line, those two runs, HBK, Hagelin, Bonino, Kessel, and it was a matchup nightmare for opposing teams. Not only did you have to deal with Crosby, Malkin on their respective lines, sure, they played Kessel with Malkin quite a bit, but they also, whenever they felt like it, and they did it quite a bit, they decided to move Kessel down to the third line and have them run the show down there with Bonino and Hagelin, and it was a nightmare to deal with. But those two teams, both years, were so deep. They could beat you so many different ways. Like, I still go back to 2016, Game 6 against the Sharks. The Penguins take that lead into the third period, and they didn't give the Sharks anything. They gave them no time in the offensive zone. It was textbook suffocation. When I've watched the Panthers defend with a lead in the third period, and I tweeted this year, it reminded me a lot of the Penguins in 2016, where they would just suffocate you to death and they would not give you any room. Like, that was when Mike Sullivan's system was cooking. That's what it looked like, what I've been watching with the Panthers these last couple of years. So that's a pretty big similarity to me.
Yeah, and for the Panthers, it was for them. It wasn't, at least in this run, it wasn't the third period that they would break away. It was in the final. It would be the first period for them. But right, with the exception of Game 1 and Game 4, they had a 2-goal lead and a 3-goal lead in Games 1 and 4. That Stanley Cup final was not as close as the series indicated. But it's crazy because you even talk about the third line for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Bonino gets hurt in game 2 in that 2017 final, and then he doesn't return for the rest of the series. I mean, the both times the Penguins had to adjust when it came to injuries. Letang is out in mid-February, which, crazy enough, Matthew Tkachuk is out in mid-February, although Matthew Tkachuk did make his return to the Panthers lineup in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup playoffs. But a lot of credit goes to a lot of the guys who would step up into a bigger role, like for the Pittsburgh Penguins, Ron Hainsey going up to the top pair. For the Panthers, it's Seth Jones going up there for multiple times, because Ekblad got suspended not once but twice in the season. So that's another big deal for how they've been about how the depth has come through.
Yeah, and even during the 2016 Cup run, if I also recall correctly, if my memory serves me right, Kris Letang was suspended for one of those games in the second round series against the Washington Capitals, and they were able to still win that game, because I was really nervous going into that game, because I'm like, the way Letang is playing, like, I still think that's like one of the best runs I've ever seen from him. Like, just after Mike Sullivan took over, I think he was arguably the best defenseman in hockey, in my opinion. Didn't win the Norris, but he was still sensational that season. And he had a little bit of a vicious hit in the second round series. He was suspended the one game for interference. And I was like, man, I just don't know if I like their chances here. I know they're at home, but they were able to somehow win that game. And then he comes back. Everything is fine and dandy for the rest of the playoffs, but you were able to survive just that one game. Obviously, Ekblad, his suspension was a lot longer, especially the second one. But the similarity there is also interesting. And then, we also talked before the show, Armando, goaltending, Murray, Marc-Andre Fleury, especially Murray in 2016, just gave them electric goaltending. And then in 17, Fleury started it, and the balls that Mike Sullivan had to go away from him when he started to struggle, to Matt Murray, who ended it. Just, again, balls of steel there, because that could have backfired. Like, Murray hadn't played in a bit, and Fleury had been so good, was riding that momentum. Like, oh, he's been here for so long, he's going to lead them to the next cup. But I'll still always say, like, he started that run, but Murray ended it with the way that he played coming in for relief for Fleury. They don't win that Stanley Cup without both goalies.
Yeah, and for the Panthers, when it came to Alex Line and Bob, that was the year that they didn't win. But the contrast is Bobrovsky going from start to finish in both runs and the fact is the Panthers were able to suppress shots even more, where Bobrovsky in the first run to the final, he was facing 33 shots a game, and in the last two runs he averaged around like 24, 20, 25, and multiple times the Panthers were able to go 10-minute stretches without allowing a shot, allowing Bob to rest and everything. And crazy enough, if it's not for the Panthers trading out of the number 1 overall pick in 2013, which is the year that they drafted Nathan Horton, maybe the Penguins don't get Marc-Andre Fleury to begin with, even though they already had Roberto Luongo there. They were not drafting Marc-Andre Fleury there. So who knows what could have happened there. But we got a lot more to get to on this edition of the show. We are going to talk about coaching between these two teams, and we're going to continue the conversation on just the ability to keep guys and get guys around the edges for both teams. We'll discuss that more next here on this crossover of Locked On Panthers and Locked On Penguins. Welcome back to this special crossover edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Penguins. I'm Armando Velez. That is Hunter Hodies of Locked On Penguins. And it's crazy because these two teams, when it came to their runs, the back-to-back for Pittsburgh in 16, 17, and of course 2009, the contrast is the interim tag for both Dan Bylsma and Mike Sullivan. And it's crazy. You talk about the balls to change the goaltending, like you mentioned earlier, but how about coming off a run in 2008 where they lost the final against Detroit, and then mid-season making that move to bring in Dan Bylsma, and also the even with Mike Sullivan and bringing him in as well. So that's another thing. And for me, even mid-season when Andrew Burnett took over for Joe Quenneville, I was saying, do not take the interim tag off, because you actually at least want to give yourself options. And I was saying that it was on the record for a good part of this season. And then Paul Maurice resigned. He became available. And June 22nd, 2022, a big moment in Florida Panthers history, bringing in Paul Maurice. And crazy, their parade happened to be on the 3-year anniversary of that hire.
That's also awesome. And yeah, it was crazy because, like, we all knew that they needed to make a coaching change. It just wasn't working out for Mike Johnston. The team was kind of lackluster. They weren't playing well defensively. They weren't getting enough offensively. And then Rutherford says, you know what? Screw this. He promotes Mike Sullivan. If I recall correctly, Mondo, I don't even think he was on the interim tag. He just said, hey, you're being promoted and you're going to be on this bench here with Rick Tocchet and Jacques Martin, who was also a really good assistant coach. I don't think enough people talk about the job that he did with the penalty kill in both of those runs. He was really good as an assistant. And then we all know Rick Tocchet, his work on the power play, it was second to none. So yeah, he got promoted and it took them a little bit to get going. But once they really got going in March, when they were riling off all these wins and into April, I remember there was a game against Washington. This was, late March 2016. And they came out swinging. Washington tied the game. They had the Metro locked up by then. But the way they were able to dominate after Washington tied the game, they scored a few unanswered goals. I was like, they might be able to do something this year. Like, this looks like a completely different team. And sure enough, they blow through the Rangers. They beat the Capitals. And hell, that series could have ended in 5 games. If we're being honest, both series could have ended in 5 games. They were both bangers. But the Penguins were dominating the early portion of the series before winning later on. And then they have 2 really tough series, especially one against the Lightning. But just the way that he had them playing such flawless hockey in both runs was absurd. But, Paul Maurice, it's funny. He goes from a hire where I think a lot of the mainstream people, and I will say this, I even questioned it myself. I was like, really? This is who you're going with after what he was doing before? And then I'm like, well, I'm just a complete moron because he's turned them into an absolute juggernaut. And he has pushed every single right button these last few years, and we'll have an opportunity to do it again this year. So that's always fun to think about. I still think the Panthers have a really good shot at doing this, but the thing with the Penguins was they eventually got gassed. Like in 2018, you could tell against the Capitals, they were tired, but also that Capitals team, they were playing a team that, how do I want to say this? Like, it was their boogeyman. Like, they wanted to get over the hump. Like, they knew they had not beaten them in 3 playoff series in the Ovechkin Crosby era. And they knew if we can just get through this team, all that pressure's off us and we can just kind of be on cruise control. And for an extent, they kind of were. Like, yeah, they had that tough series against the Lightning, but then they beat Vegas in the final that year. But they don't win. If they don't win that series against, Pittsburgh, I mean, again, who knows if they even have a Stanley Cup in the Ovechkin era. That is just crazy to think about. But, the Penguins had that to worry about. A little bit more of a tired team. I like the moves that they made at the deadline, especially getting Derek Brassard. It was a move that made so much sense on paper. You get a really good third line center, but then he just really didn't want to play third line center. He's like, no, I kind of want to play in the top 6. And he kind of, moaned about it and stuff like that. Just wasn't the best fit, I think. So you also had that, but I think with the Panthers now, again, the East, I don't think is that good heading into this year. But the one thing I still worry about, like, are they going to have enough energy? Are they going to have their legs for another full season, especially going for a 4th straight season? Because, like, it's hard getting, to 2 straight finals. It's hella hard getting to 3. It's that much harder going to 4 straight Stanley Cup finals. So I just question, like, the Penguins, are they going to have their legs for that?
Yeah, and asking that at the time it was very valid. And you talk about Mike Sullivan pressing the right buttons, and they're there for the Penguins. And you think about, you mentioned Jacques Martin earlier, former Panthers head coach Jacques Martin. So so had to give that a little bit of a mention. The turning point for the Panthers, at least in 2023, was just that review where Paul Maurice just gives it to his team on the bench, which that call on the goal was offside and got reversed, and then the Panthers end up winning that game. They go 6-1-1 in that final stretch to make the postseason, including the Blackhawks defeating the Penguins on that Tuesday in April. That got the Panthers in. But I just want to, before we sign off here, I want to talk about just the ability to keep guys. And like we mentioned about the cap and everything, the Panthers lost Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Vladimir Tarasenko, a deadline addition that they got, who Vladimir Tarasenko owns a place in Weston. He spoke about it to the media quite a few times. Brandon Montour, Kevin Stenlund, but we're able to replace it with Nate Schmidt for a year. Brad Marchand comes in and they're still able to extend them. They Seth Jones and Tomas Nosek as the replacements, but just the ability to replace some of those depth pieces from one year to the other. How impactful has that been as far as like other guys from looking at the 2016 team and then saying, I want a little bit of a piece of that, and then coming in and helping out the Penguins complete it once again in 2017.
Yeah, I mean, the fact they were able to go out and get Ron Hainsey, that was so big. Like, I didn't think much of it, but he was such a rock for them during that playoff run, especially without Kris Letang. Like, they didn't have their number one defenseman that entire Stanley Cup run, and they were able to basically piece together a, what's the word I'm kind of looking for? Like a makeshift defensive group, and just into a group that could lock things down. Like, that's literally what they were able to do. And it was crazy. Again, Jim Rutherford was on such a year and a half long heater that everything he touched turned to gold. You know, the Justin Schultz acquisition in 2016 was so big. He turns into an absolute dude in 2017, especially during the playoffs. He was so clutch for the Penguins during that run. Ian Cole was also really clutch for the Penguins during that run. You get Ben Lovejoy for both of those runs. Also a very clutch player, especially in his own end, the way that he was able to really shut things down, just a thing of beauty for the Penguins. But this is where things kind of contrast. After the Penguins lost in 2018, I think Jim Rutherford started to kind of lose his way a little bit. With regards to Bill Zito, though, he hasn't. He's just stuck to his plan. He tries to replenish when he can. His team has an identity. He goes out and acquires players that fit that identity. But for Rutherford, he kind of just tried to, again, just chase the wrong things. So that's kind of where things went wrong for the Penguins. So you signed, players like Jack Johnson. You bring in, for example, this was during the 17-18 season. You bring in Ryan Reeves, which that was not going to work out. He had Tom Wilson syndrome after that, which was very strange to me, by the way. I don't know what was going on. Like, you had just beaten Tom Wilson twice, and he still was living rent-free in your head. I just really did not understand that. You bring in Matt Hunwick as well for a little bit at a time, after the back-to-back cup runs. He made a lot of moves that made me question a lot of things. So I don't think you have to worry about that with Bill Zito, because I think he is arguably the best general manager in hockey. He knows what he's doing. His front office is very good. So as long as you have him, I think he's going to keep making, good move after good move. And I should say for Ben Lovejoy, it was 15-16, 16-17, he spent with the New Jersey Devils. That popped in my head a little bit, but still, he was very clutch for the Penguins in 15-16. But even after that, after he left, Ian Cole was so huge. Justin Schultz, Ron Hainsey, we can keep going down the list if you want. That makeshift defensive group was just absolutely dynamite for the Penguins. And I can't believe I'm saying that just because they were without Kris Letang.
Yeah. And it's so crazy now looking at Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin. You wouldn't be, and what they're doing in Vancouver is like, you wouldn't even recognize this group on what they're doing, and just all the head scratching stuff, especially the Thatcher Demko extension. I'm like, what are they doing here?
Right.
But win or lose for the Florida Panthers, they're going to be with that group. They're going to die. They're going to live and die with it. They're going to get a year older as well. So it's just really about how do you implement around, and with the cap going up, they're going to be able to hopefully sign or trade for someone who could at least provide a little bit of a young blood as they try to keep up with the rest of the NHL in the case that they do lose. But at least on my end, we are hoping that the Florida Panthers continue their pursuit of a three-peat. And you mentioned some of the mistakes that they made about him losing his way, and health is going to be key to the Florida Panthers going on this in their attempt for a three-peat here. But Hunter, I want to thank you so much for doing this crossover with me of the Locked On Florida Panthers and Locked On Penguins, comparing and contrast the Panthers and the Penguins back-to-backs, and as the Panthers are looking to become a dynasty, hoping to three-peat here. But Hunter, tell everybody where they can follow you and your work online, my friend.
Yes, you can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodies. You can follow my co-host Patrick Damp on Blue Sky at synonym for wet. We're going to have another episode later this week for Sidney Crosby's birthday, because that's basically a national holiday among Penguins fans. He turns 38 this week, so we'll go into his top moments, and it's crazy that he's now 38, but he's about to be 38, so we're all just old. And then we'll have another episode on Friday, and then you can also find me at the Hockey News, where I cover the Penguins and writing for him with my co-worker, Kelsey Cermak, so you can find me there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hunter, and talk to you soon.
Thank you.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast and be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL Network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Hunter Hodies, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.